And Donald Trump is to host South Africa's leader at the White House later today for a meeting that could be tense after Trump accused the country's government of being racist against white people and allowing, even in his words, a genocide to take place against minority white farmers. South Africa has strongly rejected, of course, those allegations. President Cyril Ramaphosa pushing for that meeting with Trump in an attempt to salvage his country's relationship with the US. Let's talk about it then with Kethevane Gorjestani, International Affairs Editor. Kethevane, what do you think are the reasons behind this deterioration, if you like, in the relationship between the US and South Africa, firstly?
Well, look, already diplomatically, the Americans are not too happy with South Africa because they were the first ones to launch that case for genocide against Israel in the International Criminal Court. But as you stated, it's mostly about the perceived discrimination against white South Africans that Donald Trump has really pounced on. He's made a series of accusations against the South African government, saying that they were discriminating against white South Africans, taking for as examples this controversial land expropriation law, saying that it was discriminately targeting white people in South Africa, but also pointing to other policies, including those sort of affirmative action laws, especially when it comes to a business that involves equity ownership of underrepresented groups, including, of course, Black South Africans. Now, obviously, the South African government insists that this is all to right the wrongs of the apartheid, to sort of bring back the balance and try to fight racial inequality inherited from the apartheid. And they point, of course, to some of the demographics in South Africa, which show that the white population is about 7%. Yet they are richer than blacks by any measure, and they also own 3/4 of farmland. And farmland, of course, is yet another of Donald Trump's targets, because that is the overarching and the biggest sort of accusation leveled by Donald Trump at the South African government, which is that question of, is there a genocide of white farmers in South Africa? Now, the government in South Africa has said, yes, there is a problem with crime, but there's a problem with crime all across South Africa, and white farmers are actually not different than other South Africans in the fact that they have to face that very difficult problem of crime. All of this is sort of raising the fears because of Donald Trump's really obsession with this idea of white genocide. We saw that he suspended all forms of aid for South Africa just a couple of weeks after getting into the White House. And he started that refugee relocation program, which we saw the first arrivals happening last week, about 50 white South Africans coming in, saying that these people were being persecuted because they were white. And so the question today in the Oval Office is whether Cyril Ramaphosa is going to get the sort of Zelensky treatment, or whether he'll be able to sort of negotiate with Donald Trump.
Yeah, so how might he manage to swing Donald Trump, if you like, turn him around?
Look, there's been a lot of talk coming out of the South African president's entourage, which is they're going to try to counter disinformation, try to explain what is really happening in South Africa, try to rebuild the ties. But really, they know the key to Donald Trump's heart, and that is business deals, and that is what they're coming with. The administration has talked about offering a sort of broad trade deal with the Americans. There's a big trade deficit for the U.S. when it comes to South Africa, and we know that Donald Trump does not like trade deficits. There's also the question of the extension of the AGOA, which is the African Growth and Opportunity Act. This could be extended for all of these African countries that are represented, but South Africa said that it was open, if it's not extended, to sort of renegotiate a bilateral trade agreement. Then there is the idea of having a sort of critical critical minerals deal. We heard that, of course, in Ukraine, and South Africa has a lot of these minerals, and that could be also a way to Donald Trump's heart. And there is one thing to really look out for is what will happen if there's going to be a deal for Starlink, which is, of course, the company of Elon Musk. Elon Musk, who is a South African born, he's a white South African. He has been at the forefront of that criticism and those accusations of discrimination against white South Africans. He's really had, at least until now, Donald Trump's ear. And the idea is that Elon Musk says that Starlink was refused the license because he is the owner and he is white. The South African government says, no, that is not the case. We have these laws, especially the Black Economic Empowerment Law, which says that you have to have about 30% of equity ownership that goes to disadvantaged groups, including, of course, Black South Africans, and therefore that is why. But he also never really applied for that license. What the government is now hinting at, the South African government, is that maybe they're going to sort of try to ease some of these rules when it comes to equity and try to replace them with some things that exist in other sectors of the South African economy, but not yet in the communications sector. And so they're saying that maybe he won't have to do that rule of the equity ownership, but will instead be able to invest in internships, invest in infrastructure, things like that to sort of compensate for the lack of equity ownership. One thing to watch out for, I think, in the meeting today is whether or not Elon Musk, who has not been seen very often in the White House lately, whether he will be there or not when this meeting happens.
All to watch out for. I'm sure we'll be reporting on the outcome of that meeting this time tomorrow in France 24. Anna.